lot of us like to do some of our small fruits right in the backyard, and that's kind of what we're going to touch on. If you have any questions at any point, by all means, just shout those out, and we'll try to get an answer for you. But these were my strawberries a couple years ago. I was really proud of those. I posted this picture on Facebook. And this variety is called Early Glow. It's probably one of the best tasting berries that I'm aware of. Grows really well. The first year, and when this picture was taken, was in late May. And then the following year, we had kind of a strange winter, and these ended up coming along in mid-May. So they came along fairly early on. So that's called Early Glow. We're going to start off talking about blueberries. Just some of the challenges, some of the facts about blueberries, and why they're a good fit for some of our production systems and some of our backyards. Does anybody have blueberries right now? Okay, so quite a few of you do. And do they produce pretty well? Okay. Yeah, that's one of the challenges. But blueberries, they are native to North America, so they're adapted to our climate more so than some of the other fruits that we may deal with. The bigger berries are not necessarily native, but we're all familiar with. We call them huckleberries growing up, the smaller ones that are around, or the rabbit eyes. Blueberries, a lot of folks like blueberries because they lend themselves to organic production. If you don't want to have a lot of inputs in terms of your chemicals, they're pretty good for that. If you grow apples or if you grow grapes, it's not impossible to grow those organically, but you have to have customers that don't mind ugly fruit if you're going to grow those organically. But blueberries, you can get a pretty nice harvest without adding too many chemicals or even chemical fertilizers. There is a new pest that we're dealing with now that makes the organic production of all these berries a little tougher, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Average yields of a healthy, mature blueberry bush are going to be about 6 pounds to 15 pounds. So you can do the math. If you know what your neighbors are willing to pay for per pound of blueberries, then you can figure out how much one bush is going to be worth. And last year, I think I saw fresh blueberries here in Wise County and also in Letcher County selling for about $30 a gallon along the roadside. Do you see them more or less than that?
No, it's just expensive.
Oh. On a commercial side, if you've got 6,000 pounds per acre, that's considered good. You can get quite a bit more than that with proper management. So 3 tons of blueberries per acre is what you'd be shooting for at a minimum. It's pretty rare to get much winter injury or frost damage with blueberries, and the reason for that is those flowers, they can handle 28 degrees when they're in full bloom. So when these come along and they bloom in May, and we get one of those 30-degree nights, then the blueberries are not even going to think twice about it. They can handle temperatures down to 28 degrees. And you won't have any fruit loss at that point. And this is one of the things that I think they make them work really well for a homestead situation is they can live for 50 years. Now most of the literature you see, it's going to say that the average is 20 to 30, but with proper management, 50-year lifespan is not rare. So you can get 50 years out of a blueberry patch. A few things about site selection and ground preparation. And this picture is in pounds. It's on a reclaimed site. And there are actually, believe it or not, there were 2 people who did a couple acres of blueberries each, and they were neighbors, and one didn't know the other was doing blueberries. And these 2 patches are within walking distance of each other. One of the guys, he sold them commercially the first time last year, and this one here, he's going to be selling this year for the first time. And he's in the process right now of putting up his bird netting, and keep the mockingbirds and all the other birds out of it. But if you're looking for local blueberries, I think this will be a good year. You want good air drainage, just like with any of your other fruits. If you can put them on a slope, that's ideal, because that cold air is like water. It's heavy and it'll move down past the fruits, and hopefully you won't have a frost pocket. And the slopes is going to be a little bit warmer than the air at the bottom. So you want good air drainage. You also want good soil drainage. The top of the soil may be dry, but if there's water standing below in the root zone, your blueberry plants are not going to survive. So you have to have good internal soil drainage with your blueberries. And the reclaim sites, like I said, this is on a reclaim. There's another 2-acre site on reclaim. Those work pretty well. There is some site preparation you have to do, add a lot of soil amendments, but they will produce. If you're thinking about, and I'm guessing most of you are looking at blueberries for just your own use and your friends and neighbors, but if you're thinking of doing it commercially, I wouldn't even consider it unless I had a really good source of organic mulch, and that could be old sawdust, it could be wood chips, it could be lots and lots of pine straw, because they need a lot of that organic mulch. And if you're not going to irrigate, put that drip irrigation line in, then I wouldn't consider doing this commercially, because they do have to have a good supply of water. Last year we were okay. We had a nice wet summer, but we get one of the drought years, you're going to lose a lot of your plants. So if you're thinking of doing it commercially, good source of mulch and drip irrigation. Those are must-haves. Blueberries do pretty good in this part of the world because they like an acidic soil. If you grow a vegetable garden, you want a pH that's somewhere between 6.4 and 6.8. So if you've got land that's a little bit too acidic for that, you might consider blueberries. Now, based on the soil test results I've seen, I think most of our soils are a little bit high. Most of what I've seen is 5.5 to 6. That's where the pH tends to be with our soil. So you'd add a little bit of sulfur to bring that down. And you can add sulfur or you can add aluminum sulfate. And you would till that into the top 2 to 3 inches of soil. And ideally, you want to do that 60 days before planting. So you don't want to do it, you don't want to till in the sulfur or the aluminum sulfate today and then plant tomorrow. You want to give it 60 days to sort of settle out. Those of you who have blueberries, do you add sulfur at all? Is that something you do on a regular basis?
Aluminum sulfate.
You got aluminum sulfate? And you monitor the pH pretty closely, you know, kind of where you're at? Another very vital bit of information you can get from your soil test is how much calcium you have in the soil. And if that calcium level is above 2,500 pounds per acre, it's going to be really hard to maintain that low pH. And on one of these sites in town, as a matter of fact, they had a calcitic shale as the parent material beneath the soil. And so their calcium level is about 2,700 pounds per acre. So it's really hard for them to maintain that low pH. They can add the sulfur and it'll bring the pH down for a while, but it's going to climb right back up. So ideally, you look at your soil test and it would have a calcium level that's below 2,500 pounds per acre. And if you added lime in the last few years, then that number is going to be elevated. It's going to have a high calcium level. This table basically shows what it takes to lower your pH 1 full unit. For example, if it's 6 and you want to lower it to 5, you'd add this much sulfur or aluminum sulfate. If you've got a heavy clay soil, you'd add 2.25 pounds of sulfur per 100 square feet, or 13.5 pounds of aluminum sulfate per 100 square feet. But if you bring us a soil test or you send a soil test to Virginia Tech, it'll have specific recommendations. So you don't have to remember this. That'll be on your soil test. Tell you how much sulfur you need to add. Any questions up till now about site prep? All right, the plants that you get, this is one situation. In some cases, it doesn't matter if you get 1-year-old plants or 2-year-old plants, but in the case of blueberries, you're going to come out ahead if you get 2-year-old plants. You're going to get fruit a whole lot sooner. You're going to have healthier plants. So when you're shopping, looking at the nurseries, and look for those 2-year-old plants. You want plants that are 18 inches to 2 feet tall. That's a good height to look for. And sometimes you'll run across them in the garden centers that are very, very small and stunted. I'd steer clear of those. I'd get those nice, tall, healthy-looking blueberry plants. You can get them bare-rooted or potted. Doesn't really matter, just based on your preference. You want to look for certified virus-free plants if you can, because once you introduce a virus on your property that affects the blueberries, you may be dealing with that from now on. That may linger around. So if you can get certified virus-free plants, that's going to put you ahead of the game. Now, our varieties that people may be growing in this part of the world, for the most part, what we're going to be talking about tonight are the northern blueberries or the high bush blueberries. They're the big ones. They're the ones that people like to put on their cereal or put in their yogurt. We also, in some parts of Virginia, we have the southern variety, the rabbit eye, the smaller one. But it tends to really not overwinter well. It doesn't like cold winter, so the northern does a little better. The low bush blueberries, they grow those a lot in Maine. They don't do well here at all, so we won't even consider those. And then the huckleberries, there are a whole bunch of different plants that have the word huckleberry. It's used to describe it. And those may be related to the blueberries, or they may not. Depends on who you ask. So it may be a totally different genus, totally different species. When it comes to planting, if you're going to put these in rows, a north-south orientation is what you want to shoot for, because that makes sure you get plenty of sunlight penetrating those leaves, drying things out. If you're going to put them in rows, you want a good 10 to 14 feet between the rows, and that helps facilitate if you're picking with a pickup truck. You're driving a pickup truck down between the rows, and spreading mulch. So 10 to 14 feet between the rows, and then the plants themselves, you're going to space 4 to 6 feet within the rows. And at that spacing, when these become mature, you're going to have a hedgerow. These blueberries are going to grow like a hedge, and you'll be able to walk down and just harvest all along the hedge. The University of Illinois did a study where they looked at different diameters and depths of the planting hole. And what they found out is if you have a narrow depth that's deep, or a narrow diameter and a more of a depth, then you get more production than with a wide hole that's shallow. So if you can plant with a post hole digger, you're probably going to have better plants, healthier plants, than if you have a wide bowl-shaped hole that you put your blueberries in. It's good to have the blueberries on an elevated soil surface, a raised bed. It doesn't have to be the kind of raised bed with frames, but if you can pull that soil up 4 to 6 inches, that's going to help with drainage, and that's the ideal situation. If you know somebody that's got one of those commercial bed layers, then that's going to be very handy to have. But drainage is key. Again, if they have wet feet, then the plants are going to die. They're not going to do well at all. Another thing that's recommended is to take a gallon of wet peat moss, work that into the bottom of the hole. So a gallon per plant. And then once you get everything planted, you want to add an organic mulch, again like the pine straw or wood chips, and put a layer about 4 to 6 inches deep. And now when that rots down to about 3 inches, then you're going to add it back up again. Keep that nice thick layer of organic mulch around your plants. This is something that I've shared with several of you earlier this week. This is a planting practice. It's called a magic circle that people will use for various types of crops. And this would lend itself really well to blueberry production. You basically hollow out the hole and build up your bed around the edges. And into the center of the hole, you throw your compostable materials. Your old table scraps, old straw, old grass. And that compost sort of develops here in the center, and your roots are reaching into the compost from the outside edge. But one of the best plantings of blueberries I ever ran across, and it was in Whitley County, Kentucky, and it was essentially this same thing. It was more of a mound, but he had just a wad of blueberries. And I think somebody had put them there, intending to transplant them somewhere later, but they were all taller than me, and they were just really loaded with fruit. And it's because they had a nice organic base to grow into. Pollination. Bumblebees, believe it or not, are really more efficient at pollinating the blueberries than honeybees are, because they have a longer snout and they can reach into that flower and get the nectar out. But bumblebees tend to be, they fluctuate. So one year you'll have a nice crop of bumblebees, the next year you won't have very many at all. So to get a good reliable crop, it is recommended to have some honeybees on the property. Is there anybody here who doesn't have a hive of bees within, say, 2 miles of your home, or you don't know? A lot of you probably do and just don't know it, but if you've got honeybees 2 miles away, then you'll benefit from the pollination. If you're doing this commercially, what's recommended is have at least 2 hives per acre. So that's quite a few honeybees, but again, they're not real efficient at pollinating the blueberries, so you need to have quite a few. And if you want to just do a quick check of whether you have good pollination or not, you can walk out when we've got a day that's in the 70s or it's in the 80s, and if you can count 4 to 8 bees on each of those blueberry bushes, then you'll get good pollination. So that's a good rule of thumb to go by. Go out on those warm, sunny days, and you want to see 4 to 8 bees per bush. Another thing that you need to do is you need to get at least 2 cultivars that bloom about the same time. Some of these will be considered early production berries in mid-season and late season. So you want to have cultivars that bloom at the same time so you get good pollination. And you're going to have much more production, you're going to have larger berries. And the handout you have in front of you, I think on the second page, you have a list of blueberries, the high bush blueberries, and most of those are going to be fine to cross-pollinate each other. Here's a picture of a honeybee on a blueberry bloom, and as you can see, they're not accessing the nectar from the opening of the flower. They make a hole in the side and they reach in that way to get it. So it's not real efficient, but it's a little more predictable than the bumblebee. Harvest. As soon as those blueberries start blooming, you can mark your calendar for 60 to 80 days, and that's when you can expect to be harvesting your crop. You're going to need to plan for a 2 to 3 week harvest period. And with some of these different cultivars that work really well together, the early season bloomers, a couple of those examples are Duke and Spartan. So they'd be good cross pollinators. They come into fruit early in the summer. Your mid-season varieties would include Ozark Blue, Sierra, Toro, and Blue Crop. And then your late season varieties would include Nelson, Darrow, and Elliott. So what some people like to do is plant a couple of these and a couple of these and a couple of these so they can prolong their harvest season. And that's a pretty wise way to do it. All right, pruning. That's I know that's something people have a lot of questions about. When you get that old wood, and when you see some blueberries, you can tell. You can look at those stalks at the base, and you can tell which ones are old and which ones are young and vigorous. But those younger canes, they're much more efficient at producing fruit. The older canes, they put a lot of their energy into leaf production and so forth, and you just don't get much fruit from those older canes. So those nice, smooth, reddish-looking younger canes are the ones that are going to bear your fruit for you. You want to prune your blueberries. You start in February, and as long as you're done by the time those buds start to break, then you're going to be fine. Don't prune it all once those buds swell, because you're going to hurt your fruit production. This is a hard one for people to swallow, but really, if you want to have long-term healthy plants, we're talking about that 50-year goal. Those first 2 years, you want to remove all the blooms, because that plant's only got so much energy, and it can put that energy into fruit production, or it can put the energy into the root and limb development. And that first 2 years is a critical time to get established. So as hard as it is, you can put on a glove and pull all those blooms off those first 2 years, and that's going to encourage those roots to spread out, go a little deeper, and you're going to have a stronger plant.
Is that the first 2 years of their life, or the first 2 years after you plant?
After you plant. Because when you buy them, they're going to be 2 years old, and so when you plant them, you'll get blooms probably that first year and then the second year. Those of you who have blueberries, did you all do this? Okay, y'all disagree. Lucy said yes, and Doug said no.
Well, we did part of them.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to do. I mean, you're.
Well, we had 3 different varieties
Okay.
in order for them to pollinate, and
Right.
we did part of them.
Okay.
We
What
didn't.
about the rest of you? Did you remove the blooms?
I did on the way.
And that goes for a lot of fruits. We'll talk about strawberries later. That's something you need to do with strawberries. If it's just 1 year, you want to pinch those blooms off. And that's really tough to do if you're thinking about what you're going to make out of these. I wouldn't get too concerned about pruning the first 3 years, but you do want to go in every spring and you want to take out if you see any kind of diseased wood, or if you see any limbs that are particularly spindly, anything that's damaged. You would take those out the first 3 years, but otherwise I won't get too carried away with it. Just something to remember that'll help with your pruning process. If you think about that big healthy blueberry bush, it shouldn't have any canes on it that are more than 5 or 6 years old, because you're going to prune a few every year, and if you've got any that are older than that, then it's sucking a lot of energy out of the plant, and it's going to lessen your production. So ideally, if you've got a mature blueberry bush, you want to have about 20 good canes. That's what you want to shoot for. And the ideal scenario is that you're going to have 2 to 3 canes of each age up to 6 years old. In other words, you're going to have a couple of canes that are 1 year old, a couple that are 2 years old, and so forth. And I guess if you just had one bush, you could use different colored flagging tape every year to keep track of that. But if you've got very many, it's going to be hard to keep up with. But that's the ideal situation. And then once you've got that process started, you can go in each year and take out 2 of the oldest canes. And you can tell, again, if you haven't looked at blueberries very closely before, you can tell which ones are the oldest because they got that rough grayish mark on them, where the younger stuff will be more of a smooth with a reddish color. And when you cut those off, say these two that you're, two of the oldest ones you're cutting off every year, you want to cut them at the ground level. Don't want to leave a stub on there, you want to cut it off at the ground. Any questions about pruning? Because I know that's something people have a lot of people are just not real confident about doing it. This is the one I said that we've got a pest that's going to make organic production of a lot of these fruits a lot tougher. And this is it. And I think I've mentioned this in probably half of these garden things that I've done. It feels like I have. This is a fruit fly. It's called the spotted winged Drosophila. And it's only been in Virginia maybe a year, not very long at all. Very, very tiny, like a gnat, like any other fruit fly. And what she does is she goes through the orchard or your blueberry patch, your raspberry patch, and she finds those really soft fruits and she lays her eggs on those. And what happens is your customers may open up, or you at your house bust open these fruits and they've got little maggots inside of it. So not real appealing at all. But the spotted winged Drosophila fly is a problem with grapes. It's a problem with, particularly with raspberries and blackberries. That's the biggest problem, but also with blueberries, strawberries. In some cases, peaches and apples, if they've split open, it can cause problems in those. But it's something that's here now. It's something we're going to have to deal with. So hopefully more solutions will come about. One thing that would really help is when you're picking your blueberries, you have two buckets, and one you could put the stuff that's ripe and good to eat, and the other you could put the stuff that's overripe, because that's what really draws the Drosophila in. If you've got really soft, overripe fruit that's hanging on the bush, that's what they tend to go for. That's what they like to lay their eggs in. So sanitation is one cultural practice that'll help with managing this pest. This is an organic product that is labeled and is very effective against the Drosophila fly. It is OMRI labeled, so certified organic producers can use this product and trust. The problem is this stuff is over $400 per pint. So it's not really an option for most of us. But hopefully more of this type of thing will be developed over the next few years, and that'll be a little more readily available. Another problem you might run into, and I see this, you can walk in any blueberry patch and you'll see a few leaves like this in the middle of summer when everything should be nice and green. This is iron fluorosis, it's iron deficiency. And what tells you that it's iron is in some of these leaves here, they'll turn yellowish, but the veins will stay dark, nice and dark green. And then some of these younger leaves will be reddish or brownish. And this you're going to have a lot of if you don't get your pH corrected. If your pH is too high and you don't get it lower to that range we mentioned, you can have plenty of iron in your soil, but the plant just won't take it up. So when you see this, that's a pretty good signal that you need to lower your pH into that correct range. That's an iron deficiency. You may also see a nitrogen deficiency, and it's going to be just yellow leaves. You won't see as much reddish and brownish color. But the iron fluorosis or iron deficiency, that's a really common problem with blueberries, especially if your pH is too high. And then another pest that's definitely a big problem for your blueberries are going to be your birds. Mockingbirds, blackbirds, sparrows, they'll all go after your blueberries. And really the only way to deal with them is to invest in netting, bird netting to keep those out. I knew one commercial producer in Kentucky who would, he would sell blueberries in early July, and there came a point where he'd close shop and let the birds have the rest, because he didn't want to fool with all the netting. But he definitely wasn't making a profit that way, and he was losing a lot of fruit. So it's going to be important to deal in invest in some kind of bird netting. Has anybody ever heard of a garden huckleberry or a Wonderberry? Does that ring a bell with anybody? Okay. I just want to put this up here because I know some of you are interested in growing things that are a little unique. But if you see this in your garden catalog, this is not in any way, shape, or form related to the blueberries we just talked about, or even the traditional huckleberries. This is actually related to tomatoes. It's in the nightshade family. This is grown as an annual. It's also called Wonderberry, and I try to call it that just so I don't get myself confused between huckleberries and this particular thing. I had a commercial grower back in Kentucky who started growing these and would make a lot of pies out of them. He even sold them to Cumberland Falls State Park, and they made pies out of them. But it's an annual crop. It's a good bearer. You grow it just like tomatoes. You start the seeds, set out the plants, harvest it, and then you're done. It's just an annual crop. It's not something you can eat right off the vine. It doesn't have much of a flavor to it, but you sweeten it up, and it does make a pretty nice dessert. But just in case you're looking for something kind of unique, that's a pretty good one.